everybody, it's Nikki here and welcome to a Bookish Friday, where today I am going to give you my April wrap-up. So here I talk about all the books that I read in April. So I have my reading journal here, so I'm going to go through all of the stats for you first. So in April I read a grand total of 16 books, and I read no audiobooks this month. So I had no audio hours. My page count for this month was really high. It was 6,017 pages. My star ratings for this month, I had a really good month. The owls in April really, I don't know, I must have just been in a really good mood and really liked all my books, because I have 0 1 or 2 star books. None whatsoever. So for 3-star books I had 6. For 4 stars I gave to 5 books, and for 5 stars I also gave to 5 books. So I had a really good month. In regards to the authors, I read 3 male authors and I read from 13 female authors. And in the bindings, I read 7 hardbacks and I read 9 paperbacks. For the origins, I read no books that I had to borrow from either the library or from Scribd or Audible or BorrowBox, which is my library's online borrowing app. I read all 16 books from my physical TBR off my shelves, which was really great. And in formats, I read no ebooks, no audiobooks. All 16 were physical books. So you could say that was a good thing that I got 16 books off my shelves, but I'm probably going to keep the majority of these books, so they will technically stay in my book collection. They'll just be on the red bookshelves, which are sort of in that direction instead of in that direction. But, you know, the current situation, the libraries are shut, and I had books that I'd picked out for my owls from my physical TBR, so that was 12 books straight off. So yeah. In regards to genres, I read no thrillers, no classics, which is shocking for me because I've really enjoyed reading my classics recently. I read 3 contemporaries, 1 manga graphic novel, 1 middle grade, 1 non-fiction, which I'm very pleased at, and of course I read 10 fantasy sci-fis. Let's be real, they're fantasies. So yeah, those were all my statistics. So let's go through all of the books that I read, and I'm going to start off with the owls. So for my owls, I wanted to become a librarian with the mermaid linguistics or merpeople linguistics as an extra seminar. So for that I needed 6 owls. So I'm going to talk through them with you now. So the first owl I completed was Ancient Runes, and for that I read A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Brigid Kemmerer, and I gave this 5 stars. I loved it. This was a continuation from the A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which was the first book, and the first book was a kind of retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and although I did enjoy it, I just felt like Brigid Kemmerer was kind of limited to what she could write because she was stuck within the confines of the retelling, Whereas this one, because it was just a continuation of the story and not stuck to the confines of being a retelling, this is not a part of the retelling anymore, this is just the story now. I felt like Bridget Kemmerer was able to really let go in this one and really do what she does really well. And I just really enjoyed this story. There was some introduction to some new characters. Now, normally I'm the sort of person that when new characters start to come in, I'm a little bit iffy about them and I don't know whether I like them or not. But by the end of this story, I was really rooting for those new characters and I was really happy with the ending of this. And kind of for the first time since really getting back into reading from the beginning of 2019, for the first time in my life, I was like, why is the next book not already out? Like, the ending on this one just really gripped me. And I was just like, I need the next book now. Like, when is the next book out? Because the third and final book, I believe this is going to be a trilogy, is obviously going to maybe released either later this year or early next year. So I have a whole year to wait and I'm like, no, I want it now. So yes, I did really enjoy this. Yeah, it's really interesting story. This follows Grey's character, whereas the first book was with Harper and Prince Ren. But this one carries on Grey's character, and Grey was a secondary character in the first book. And I love Grey, so yes, 5 stars for A Heart So Fierce and Broken by Bridget Kemmerer. The next prompt I read was Arithmancy, and this one I read The Places I've Cried in Public by Holly Bourne. And this is a contemporary, and contemporary is not a genre that I've been like very interested in recently. It's all like boy meets girl, girl falls in love, there's a few problems, and they just seem very wishy-washy for me recently. But this one is different. This one has a life lesson to tell you. This one is about a girl who has recently broken up with her boyfriend, and she's coming to terms with the fact that maybe her relationship with her boyfriend wasn't as good as she remembers it to be. That maybe there might have been some manipulation, some abuse, some downright horrible behaviour from her boyfriend, and she's having to come to terms with that. So it's a very good life lesson for young girls to read about and come to terms and understand with. This is an extremely important book for everyone to read, I think. I did give this a 5 stars, of course. I was thinking, when I first finished it, I actually gave it a 4 stars, but throughout the day, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop thinking about how great this book was in its exploration of domestic abuse, and how we often think that domestic abuse is violence, is hitting or punching or kicking or biting or slapping, but sometimes the worst kind of abuse is not violent or physical at all. It's actually mental, and they can affect us worse than a physical abuse, because if somebody hits us, we know that's not good, that's not okay, and we can back away. But when it's mental abuse, we tend to try and kind of convince ourselves that what they meant was different to what they actually said, and all of this. So it was really important. And what I really liked about this book was right at the front, it does say it is a work of fiction but deals with many real issues, including controlling behaviour and sexual assault. Links to advice and support can be found at the back of the book. So the warning is right at the front to let you know there is a sexual assault in here. So if you are triggered by that, please do be aware of this going in. I will say it's not violent. It's not... I felt okay with it, but other people might not. And then obviously at the back we have some helplines here, and these helplines are UK based because I have seen a couple of books that have dealt with difficult issues, but the helplines at the back have always been US based, and obviously I'm living here in the UK, those are no good to me. So it is really good. I mean, obviously this was published in the UK, published by Usborne, but I have come across books that have had US information in the back, and that's not helpful to people in the UK. So yeah, that was really good. So I did bump up from a 4 originally to a 5 because I just kept thinking how great this book was. It really was good, and I would definitely look at picking up some more Hollyborn in the future. The next prompt I read was for Defense Against Dark Arts, and for that one I read A Sprinkle of Sorcery by Michelle Harrison. This is again the sequel to Pinch of Magic, which was the first book. I think I read that last month, so I read that in March, and so I moved on to the second book this month in April. I enjoyed this one. It was quite interesting. I feel a bit weird and confused about how I feel about these books. I think they are interesting stories. It was nice. Like, it was okay. I mean, I gave it a 4 stars because I did prefer this one over the first book, which I think I also gave that 4 stars, to be honest, but maybe it was just a 3. I don't know. But I did really enjoy the story of this one. The first book follows a different story to this one. This is kind of like another adventure for these kids to go on, these 3 sisters. But yeah, I don't know. This one had a bit more danger in it for me, and a bit more peril in there. So yeah, it was very interesting, and it got a 4 star. The next book I read was for History of Magic, and for that I read Winterwood by Shay Earnshaw. Okay, now in my book I have written this down as a 4 stars, but I was thinking about this when I was preparing for this video, and I was thinking, do you know what? I kind of want to up that to a 5. This was just so atmospheric. I think this book is definitely a Halloween book. Reading this on Halloween would give you all the feels. Like, this is spooky. Like, this is so atmospheric and thrilling and exciting, and it was wonderful. We have a mysterious wood that nobody goes into, and we have a lake, and then we have a young girl living with her mum at the edge of this lake, and her family have been called witches by the locals, and they seem to have this kind of family history linked to this winter wood. And then across the lake there is like a boys camp for wayward boys who are on their last chance at school, who would be sent to prison if they weren't sent here, you know, those kinds of camps. And the young girl, one night while her mother is away, she comes across a young boy in the Winterwood, and she takes him back to her cabin to help him because he's unconscious when she first finds him, and she nurses him back to health. And then she comes across his story, which is he went missing 2 weeks previously, and there's some kids, and something went down the night he went missing, and yeah, it was just spooky as hell. The twists and the turns in this, I loved it. I've put it down as a 4-star, but really the more I keep thinking about it, it's a 5-star. I loved it. I'm going to be rereading this at Halloween, so watch out for this being in my October TBR, because I am going to reread this for that, because I think the atmosphere would be perfect for it. So yeah, going to be rereading that one. The next prompt the next class I took was Transfiguration, and for that one I read Fathomless by Jackson Pearce, and this is kind of a retelling of The Little Mermaid. This was unique in its style of retelling, because you got the feeling that you were reading a Little Mermaid story, but it was a story within its own right, and I didn't feel that Jackson Pearce was limited at all. I felt like she'd really grasped the story of The Little Mermaid and really made it her own, and I just loved it. In here we have a kind of love triangle, but it's with 2 girls and 1 boy. So that was new, because we're used to having 2 boys and 1 girl, but this was 2 girls and 1 boy, but the 2 girls also become friends as well. So we got a little bit of stuff going on, but it was brilliant. And then we got a little bit of a twist at the end, which I was not expecting, and it was like, wow, I kind of want more in this story. I want more from these characters. It was like, I thought that I knew where the story was going, and then it went, nope, see ya, I'm off in this direction now. And I was just like, okay, I'll follow you, because it was great. I loved it so much. I gave this 4 stars, so yeah, brilliant. So that was my librarian owls done. So for my Merpeople linguistics prompt, I had to read Herbology, and for that I read The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. And let me just say that as soon as I finished this book, I pre-ordered the second book, The Faithless Hawk, I think it's called. I love this book. I really liked the story. There's a society where there are different tiers of people in this society, different castes as they're called. You have the peacocks, no, not the peacocks, they're not peacocks. The phoenixes, sorry, the phoenixes are the royalty. Then you have swans and peacocks, and hawks are your guards and your security people, your fighters and soldiers and stuff. And then you have your crows, and your crows are the lowest of the low. They have no magic in this world, whereas all the other castes have some form of magic in them. And the only thing that the crows are good for is for getting rid of the dead, because unfortunately in this land there is a plague, and it is killing people, and the only people who are immune to this plague are the crows. So they are asked to remove the bodies and burn them. And this is the story. There's a revolution about to begin, and I love this. I love the magic system. I love the characters. There was some witty banter, some very sassy characters. I loved it, and the author wasn't too scared either to kill a couple of characters off as well, which I was really shocked at when that happened. But yeah, so very, very happy with this. I gave this one a 4 stars. So all of these books I read for to become a librarian with the Merpeople Linguistics Seminar, but I decided to carry on and read for all the rest of the prompts as well. So let's go on to those. So the first one was Astronomy, and for that one I read a graphic novel, The Wicked and the Divine, the Faust Act. This is the first one by Gillen, McKelvey, Wilson and Cowles. I think that's 4 people who created this. You're going to ask me, what's this about? This is about a group of gods who return as young people. I'm reading the back. I read this. I think this is going to take me a couple of rereads to really kind of grasp what was happening. I was lost and confused through most of it. Obviously, with graphic novels, you're stuck to minimal narration and just a lot of drawings and speech bubbles. That's a graphic novel. But this one just, I don't know. I just didn't grasp what the hell was happening and what the hell was going on. And I liked the art style. I really did. I mean, I loved the art style. I mean, it was beautiful, but I don't know. I got a little lost and confused, definitely, at the beginning as to what was going on, who was who. By the end of it, I kind of grasped a little about what was happening. Somebody's being double-crossed. I don't know. But I am going to try and carry on with this series. I think as I go along, maybe I might grasp the gist of it. But I gave this a 3 stars because I liked it. But I'm going to need to reread this a couple of times. But I find that sometimes with some graphic novels, I just don't get the story the first time I read it. So yeah, definitely worth a reread. The next book I read, this was actually the final book that I read this in April. I saved this one till last, but I'm going to talk about it now because it's in the book in this order. So I read Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This was for the Care of Magical Creatures prompt. It is a big one. It's a Waterstones exclusive edition, and can I tell you that Sarah J. Maas is just my new favourite author, just simply. I still love Laura Stevens and I'll still purchase her books, but yeah, Sarah J. Maas is just my new favourite, and I love her writing and I love this story. I love the characters in here. The witty banter, the sarcasm, this is adult. This is so adult. If you don't like swearing, if you don't like sexual references, you are not going to like this book. There is a lot of both of those things in here. This is more steamy, I'd say, than 50 Shades of Grey. So be warned. But I love the story, the twists, the turns, the intrigue of this, because there's been murders, and Bryce, the main character, she is trying to find out what is happening. There's another character death in here which broke my heart. Just be aware. Another tears were shed. Sarah J. Maas keeps doing that to me. But bring it on. Bring it on. Again, I cannot wait for the next book in this series, because there's even mermaids in this. There's a merman. Oh, and from the sounds of him, he's pretty lush, this merman. What was his name? Oh, I can't remember him now. I'm really bad for names. I do apologise, but there is a sexy merman in here as well as a sexy angel. Just yes, 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 please, yes. So I love this. I gave it 5 stars. I don't even need to check my book. I know what I gave this one. 5 stars all the way. Loved it. The next prompt I read for was Charms, and for that I read White Cat by Holly Black. This was a really quick, easy read. There's like 300 pages in this book, and this was really easy to get through. I think I read this within a 24-hour period. I started sort of late one afternoon and finished early morning the next day. It was so quick and easy to get through. This is the first book in a trilogy. So there is a young boy in here who believes that he killed his best friend a couple of years ago and has been holding on to that secret ever since. But things are not quite what they seem. So this one's really interesting. I must admit that as soon as I'd finished this book, I did want to quickly go on to the next book, thinking how quick and easy this book was to read. I thought it won't take me too long out of my TBR to be able to read the next book in this trilogy, but I didn't. I was good. I stuck to my TBR, so I might actually squeeze the second book into May's TBR, because I only had a couple of books on there. So I don't know, but yeah, I gave this 3 stars. The next book I read, I'm only going to show quickly because apparently this one always sets my camera going crazy. But this one was for divination, and that is Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez. So there it is. And then I'm going to put it down because my camera doesn't need any more excuses to play up, does it? So this book was fantastic. I'm going to take the cover off and then I can just show you the plain back. So this book was fantastic. I loved this story. There is a sequel coming out to it. I don't know how many books are going to be along these storylines. I don't know if it's going to be a duology or a trilogy yet, but I do know there is a sequel coming. But I really enjoyed this. There is a unique magic system in here. We have a revolution happening, and we have a young girl who's being a decoy for her Condessa, sorry, and then we have kind of like a Mask of Zorro kind of character, who's also causing madness and mayhem during this revolution thing. And at the beginning of the book, you think you know who the bad guy is and who the good guys are, but during the book, it kind of questions that, as if to say the good guys and the bad guys are kind of dependent as to which side you're on. So I like that this book investigated that sort of way of thinking and way of looking at conflicts and wars. So yeah, I know this was based on Bolivian politics and history, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. Put its cover back on now. The next book I read for the Owls was for Muggle Studies, and for that I finally read Wonder by R.J. Palacio. Now I know a lot of people have cried while they've read this, and I don't know if I'm just cold-hearted, I don't know, but I didn't cry for this. See, I don't feel sorry for this guy. This young kid who has this facial disfigurement, I don't feel sorry for him. I saw a very confident young boy almost. He'd make jokes and he'd stand up for himself, and he would ignore people's glances and looks and whisperings. And I just felt like he had a really great supportive family, especially his big sister, although she struggled a little as well, but she was always there for him. And I thought that yes, he has this facial disfigurement, but he had a lot of other things in his life which were much more important and much more special. Like, and I didn't feel sorry for him, so I didn't feel sadness in that sense. There is a sad moment in this book, but it was kind of over and done with pretty quickly. One thing I did like about this book was you got to see sort of the same events but through different characters. So first of all, you would go through Wonder's August, sorry, that was his name, not Wonder. you would go through August's point of view, then you would go through his sister's point of view, then you would go through a friend's point of view. And yeah, I liked that we were getting to see the same kind of scenes from each character's point of view and what was happening. So yeah, I didn't shed a tear to this one. I did enjoy it. I gave it a 3 stars. But yeah, I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't. I saw a boy who was loved and who was supported and who knew who he was. Like, he didn't apologise for who he was. He just was August, and he had a facial disfigurement, and it was everybody else's job to deal with that, not his. So I liked that. I liked that empowerment. The last book I read for my owls was my potions prompt, and for this I read Henry VIII by John Guy. This is a Penguin Monarchs non-fiction book. I did start to tab it, but then I realised that my tabbing system was going to mean that I was practically going to be tabbing every goddamn page. So I need to go back through it and try and re-tab my things. I did like make notes and things in the the margin just in pencil. I could never write in a book in pen. I could never do that. I'm beginning to allow myself to write in books because one young lady, I don't know what media she mentioned it on, either Twitter or Instagram or YouTube or something like that. But she said, you know, write in your books, bend the spines, turn the pages, scuff the pages, let people know that you love these books. These marks are marks that you love these books. And I thought, well, I'm still not going to break the spines because I need them to look pretty on my shelves, but I will stretch to writing in my books if I feel the need to. So I have started doing that. I'm still new to like annotating books, but with this being a non-fiction, I felt the need to really like make notes and annotate in here. My conclusion about Henry VIII after reading this, and this is his life from birth to death, and a little bit before about his father and that as well, which was obviously Henry VII. Don't know why I had to look that up then. Of course it was Henry VII. I don't like Henry VIII. He might have done some good as king, but as a person, as a human, as a man, gee, I hate him. So yeah, as a man, I just don't like him. He was selfish. He was like a temper tantruming toddler. You could be his best friend when you were younger, and then if you did something or said something that he didn't like as he got older, he would just have you sent to the tower, off with your head, hung, killed, left in the tower to die. You were walking on eggshells around him. He sent so many people, but as did a lot of kings and queens of the time. So I don't know, he was not a nice person. Possibly a good king, but not a good person. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Henry VIII. So that was all the books that I read. Oh, by the way, I gave that 3 stars, and I gave that book 3 stars because I liked the way that the information was presented. It was readable, it was quick, it was fast, it was easy. There was no messing about with this. You were given the information and there was no bias on this. I felt like it just told you the facts. There was no bias in the author's opinion of who Henry VIII was. So I liked that. So I gave it a 3 stars. So that was all my owls finished and complete, but obviously I read 16 books this month, not 12, so there are 4 books that I read that were not in my owls, so let me share those with you. Actually, the first book that I finished in the month of April was this one, The Love Hypothesis by Laura Stephen, my favourite author, or tied with Sarah J Maas now. This is a funny LGBTQT plus, just amazing book. I loved this. So here we have a young girl who has 2 gay dads, and she's really good at school, but she excels in science and specifically physics. And she is kind of invisible in school. Nobody knows her, nobody talks to her, she just goes about her day. She's nothing to nobody. But she fancies one of the popular boys at school, and one evening she sees an advert for some pills that claim to make you more attractive to the opposite sex. And of course, in the guise of science, she decides to try this experiment and see if it actually works. And so we have just lots of funny and comical sort of episodes following this trial. And the thing I like about Laura Stephen is you think the romance is going in one direction and then it doesn't. I don't know if that's a spoiler or not, but I like that Laura doesn't tend to do the typical contemporaries that, you know, that have been written in the past. You know, girl meets boy, they fall in love, something happens, they fall out of love, and then they realise that they can't live without each other and live happily ever after. Laura doesn't do that. The books that she writes are much more truer to life than I've ever seen in a book before. Like, you can really relate to her characters. I could see myself in the main character, which was Caro, or Caro. I could really relate to her because I was pretty invisible at school. I had my little group of friends, but I wasn't in with a popular crowd, and I had these specific classes that I excelled in, and then others I was okay at. I was always what they call a SWAT at school when I was a kid. And yeah, I could just really relate to her characters because they're just so lifelike. Like, they're not storybook characters, they're real life characters, and I love that. So yeah, I gave this one 5 stars. Just seems to be a trend with all Laura Stephen books so far. But yeah, 5 stars for The Love Hypothesis by Laura Stephen. The next book I read was for the Cosmiralong, and I reread The Final Empire, which is book 1 of the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson. Yeah, I read this April 2019 and I reread it this April. And I was reminded how much I loved this story. The magic system, the characters, the banter, the twists, the turns, the plot points, the romance. I loved it. I'm moving on to the second book in May. Cannot wait to start that book and carry on with this series. Yeah, I loved it. What can I say? I gave it, again, 5 stars. So yeah, that was that one. The next book I read was for my buddy read with Charlotte. We were continuing the Hush Hush series, and throughout April we read the second book, which was Crescendo. And I can't say much about this because it is the second book, but we likened this to Eclipse or New Moon, one of those two, from Twilight. There was so much that we could say, yeah, that is a bit like that, isn't it? And it's very similar. And just certain plot points and certain characters, they just kept reminding us both of like New Moon and Eclipse from the Twilight series. So you're like, really? But then when you check the dates that these were written, you can see that, yeah, they were pretty much out around the same time as Twilight. It was all caught up in that era of these types of books. So, of course, they were going to be very, very similar. Look, it's cheesy, but it's fun. It's a quick read. I didn't read through this as quickly as I read Hush Hush. I just couldn't put Hush Hush down, so I bumped that up in my ratings because of that. But this one was a little bit slower to read, so I gave this a 3 stars. And the final book that I read in April, although it wasn't actually the final book that I read in April, but the final book I'm going to talk about for April is The Deep by Alma Katsu. Now, I bought this as soon as I saw it advertised because it was about, or it is about, the Titanic, and it mentioned sirens. So I was like, whoa, 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 a book about the Titanic and sirens? Those are my 2 favourite subjects. Bye, bye, bye. And as luck would have it, it arrived it arrived in time for me to read it around the time of the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. So I read this, I actually began reading it on April the 15th, or April the 14th, was it? April the 14th at 11:40 p.m, which was the date and the time that the Titanic hit the iceberg and began its downward journey to the bottom of the ocean. I thought that was very fitting, and I'm going to say this. I was disappointed. This was a 5-star prediction for me when I heard its subject matter, because Titanics, sirens, I love both of those things. Of course it's going to be a 5-star. But actually reading it, if you go into this like I did, looking for mermaids, you're going to be deeply disappointed. There is a hint, a nudge in the direction of mermaids, but they're not a vital plot point. Not at all. It's a story about a young girl who was working on the Titanic when it sank, and then 4 years later she's working on the Britannic, which also sank. And it's her sort of story and what happened to her on the evening or on the days leading up to the sinking of both ships. And you're getting both timelines at the same time. So you're going like a couple of chapters on the Titanic, and then it'll switch to the 4 years later on the Britannic, and you'll have a couple of chapters of that, and then it'll come back and you'll get more chapters on the Titanic. So it is flicking backwards and forwards in the timeline. And it's not till the end that you really obviously find out what is really going on. And I was a bit disappointed. Like, as I say, I went into this thinking, mermaids are the real reason why the Titanic sank. And then why the Britannic sank. No. I'll tell you now, no. The Titanic sank because it hit an iceberg. The Britannic sank because it hit mines under the ocean's water. Not because of mermaids. That's not the twist in the story. I don't know if that's you consider that a spoiler, possibly. I might put a marker up just before I say this, just in case. I don't know. But yeah, as a book about the Titanic, this is great and was a 4 stars. As a book about the Titanic mermaids, sirens, no it's not. And I actually ended up giving this 3 stars. It lost a star because of the mermaids, because I was led to believe that they were a bigger part of the plot and they weren't. So I was deeply disappointed. So I guess if I do reread this again in the future, maybe a reread again next year on the anniversary, I might enjoy it for what it actually is, which is a story about the Titanic. Knowing full well it's not about mermaids, then maybe I might bump it up again. But I was disappointed about the mermaids. It's not about mermaids. So that was the final book. So that was it. That was my April wrap up. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.